I'd like to welcome you guys to this week's report. Today is Thursday, February 27th. Well, it is the end of February still. It feels like it's middle of July here in my garage. Actually, I had to have the door open today because it's so hot in here. I'm not used to sweating when I do my videos. I'll save the complaining about that for summertime. But nice weather today, hot, a little breezy here in Long Beach, but we got more weather, winter weather on the way. It's going to rain Saturday morning, maybe. It's definitely going to rain next week. Thankfully, it will not be raining during the PCS show the following weekend, which is something to look forward to there. But we're going to have some wind and stuff like that. Anyway, due to the lack of fishing options, my editors asked me to do another video talking about tackle. And this time I'm going to be talking about matching presentations to situations you encounter in the water. The knee-jerk reaction would be to call that matching the hatch, but that's not always the case in saltwater. It certainly wasn't on Saturday. I went to San Clemente Island, as I mentioned last week. We had slow fishing, as expected. We did see big foamers of calico bass all over the place, but they were eating the by-the-wind sailors. And you could throw anything else you had in there and they won't even look at it, which is pretty typical for bass when they get on those things. I really wish those things would just go away permanently. The bass we did catch were high in the water column and biting aggressively. 57, 58 degree water in the kelp. I threw the 7-inch weedless all day. I got a ton of bites on it, and when I talk about not matching the hatch, this is much bigger than anything these bass wanted, because I probably had 15 plus bites and did not. I had one on for a second. I think it just has hold on to the tail, but I never even caught a fish on it. Bass definitely wanted to bite it, but they were not biting in such a way that was conducive to catching them. Had I switched that out with a 5-inch MCBA host, a little boxer head like this, I probably would have caught every single one of those. But again, it's really a matter of, especially with the inshore fish, they'll bite a number of lures, but they're not going to bite them all right and actually get the hooks on them. So sometimes you have to downsize, and also sometimes you have to upsize, and I'll be talking about both those things here, but I thought this would be a good starting point. You can decide whatever lure you want to throw and go out there and just beat your head against the wall and never throw anything. I only brought one rod, one lure through it the entire day in all scenarios that we fished. And that's fine, you know, you get bites, but if you're looking to get more action than that, you have to kind of take consideration of what's happening. You know, I have this big lure, and all my bite marks are well behind the hook. There's a good chance the fish are not hitting aggressively enough, or not doing a headshot where you get the hook, which is all the way up forward here. So by switching to a smaller bait, that moves your hook up a bit, but also it makes your bait a lot shorter, more likely to put the whole thing in their mouth. Narrower body, less bulky, more apt to get eaten. So based on that, we're in a kind of a transition cycle here with the bait fisher in local waters. We have sardines. We also have anchovies. Yeah, sorry about that. We have some really small anchovies. I refer to them as rice, because they're kind of about the size of a grain of rice, it looks like. And bass love to get those things balled up and foam on them like they do with the by-the-wind sailors. The difference being, if you get a properly sized lure into those rice balls, you can get bites. But if you throw something a little bit too big, the bass are not going to even look at it. And this past summer at Palos Verdes, the 5-inch VA hose on a small lead head cast anywhere near the rice would get a bite almost every time, whereas a 7-inch bait, you might get followers, you might get short bites, but they're not eating the bait right. We also fish a little 6-inch slug in those situations, and that outfish the 7-inch bait as well, 'cause it's a small, narrow-bodied bait. Another lure that's really size-related in inshore applications are hard baits. If you're been in a tackle store, you've probably seen an SP minnow. This is 150 size, or 15F, floating. This is bone color. This may seem like a weird color to you, but it's a really good bass color. Anything bone or mint works really good. This is your go out in the summertime when the bass are biting and throw this thing on, you know, light specter, the fluorocarbon leader, and you're gonna catch bass on it. You catch small bass, you catch the 8-inch on it, you catch an 8-pounder on it. Really doesn't matter all that much. Other times of year when the fish are keyed in on smaller bait, like the rice I talked about that we caught fish in the videos, we downsize to a smaller SP minnow. This is a 130, down from 150. And there's even a smaller version, which is a 110. So all three of these are the same lure, but they're not doing a good job here, but they're all different sizes. And they all have basically the same action, but the smaller ones this year got the most bites. Actually, the 130 size was our most productive locally. So these are times where we're casting these lures in kelp, and there have been a lot of anchovies at Palos Verdes, so we're looking for something a little bit smaller. This is actually a little bit bigger than anchovy, but there's also some small smelt, things like that up there, which just kind of mimics. And then you get something really small. The problem, the smaller you go, the lighter the tackle you have to throw. You have to throw this one on light fluorocarbon line, or you're going to cast it to the, you know, the length of your rod. Then we go to other situations, similarly while fishing bass, in that, let's say you're at Catalina or you're at San Clemente Island, and there's a lot of bass there, and you want to kind of not catch the small ones, or have a better percentage of catching a bigger fish. That's when we go up to lures like this this APCO hard bait. I think it's a 150 or 170 size. I don't remember. Sorry. Blue Fever hard bait. We had a lot of success fishing this bait all last summer at Catalina, also at Clemente. And what that bait does is it's a big enough profile that smaller fish are not going to really get it. Even the size of the hooks deters a 12-inch bass from eating it. You still catch them, but you catch a lot less of them on this lure. And this lure also works for yellowtail. We caught tuna on it, everything. It's just good all-around hard bait. Another example of something, if you want to keep the smaller fish off your lure, would be like this is the Seville stick shad. Very big bait, 155 size. I think they make a 170. They make a bigger one than this, but you're not gonna get a lot of bites on this bait, but the ones you're gonna get are gonna be really big ones, as is this. You're gonna get a lot less bites on this as you are on this, but these are gonna be the bites you want normally. You can catch a 10-pounder any cast on any of these lures, but the bigger fish are normally gonna be coming on these lures. If you watched my videos this last summer and fall, and I had GoPro footage of throwing hard baits on the coast, it was the 130 size SP minnow. At the islands, it was the big APCO Blue Fever hard bait. So they all fish basically the same. Fast stop and go retrieve, fast pause, fast pause, fast pause. And you know, you watch the fish how they react to it. I talk about this all the time. If you have fish following your lure, you're either wanting it too fast or too slow, or you're not pausing it frequently enough. And that's going to really apply to what I'm going to talk about next as well. So if you just got followers that are nosing the lure all the way back to the boat, you're doing something wrong. You need to change your retrieve. Speaking of that, I'm going to switch over to service iron here. Yellowtail are the kings of having their nose on your jig all the way back to the boat and not biting it. Barracuda as well. And they're just not interested. They're curious, but you haven't triggered that instinctual reaction to eat that bait fish. So before I get more on the jigs, I want to talk about service iron. You know, there's so many guys that are just getting into it, and they're thinking you got to have a special jig or a special rod or reel or a certain type of line's going to make it better. All that stuff can give you an advantage if you know what you're doing, but don't rely on it to make you a good fisherman. Don't go buying a CNC jig. Go buy a Tatty lure or a Salis. Learn how to make that thing swim good. Maximize its potential, and then if you feel you're still better than that and you can catch more fish with a CNC jig, by all means buy one. But it's not going to, there's no magic wand. So let's talk briefly about service iron and service iron winds. A lot of guys, they cast their lure out, they put it in gear and they wind it back as medium speed, fast speed, slow speed, whatever. Well, if the fish are wide open, they'll bite it. But if they're not really biting all that well, all they're probably gonna do is follow it back to the boat. And we've all been there and seen it. Had happened to me plenty of times. So what you want to do is you want to change your cadence and make the fish that, so let's say you cast out your jig, you start winding it back. A yellowtail's behind your jig, 5 feet back, 10 feet back. You can't see it, you don't know it's there. So if, let's say that instead of your jig, this is a bait fish that's swimming along, and the yellowtail pulls up behind it. That bait fish knows through its lateral lines that there's a predator behind it. So, I got a big wasp playing in my garage grate. If I get stung here, somebody call 911. Go away. Anyway, so if this bait fish is swimming along and notices that there's a yellowtail behind it, that bait fish is not going to stay at a steady pace swimming along. It's going to haul ass out of there and swim side to side and try and evade that yellowtail. So let's say you cast your jig and now you start with a steady retrieve, you pause for a second, and you burn it real fast 2 or 3 times, and you go back to your normal speed. What your jigs do is shoot down to the side, pausing, taking a long arc, and now that yellowtail thinks that, hey, there's this bait fish knows I'm after it, it's trying to get away, or it thinks, hey, I know this bait fish doesn't see me, but he's trying to run away from somebody else. There's another yellowtail or something around, so I better eat it before the other fish does. So that's what you're doing by imparting an action into your lure, and that depends on the lure, obviously. But that is the difference between throwing a jig and being a good service iron fisherman. I guarantee, the guys like Danny Wade and whoever else the guys are in San Diego, they're not just casting out their lure and winding it back to the boat. And if you're just doing that, you're never going to get any better. It's not about how far you can cast. It's not about any of that stuff. It's not, your rod's 50 feet long or whatever, whatever nonsense. I probably get some heat for this. I fished the service iron for a long time on sport boats. 30 years probably. And what it came down to was the guys that fished the jig well, and there was the guys that got the exact same tackle as the guys who fished the jig well. And basically for those guys, it's just an outfit. Yeah, your service iron fish, you got your folded down Grundon's deck boots, or your Dickies shorts, and your flat bill hat, your 10-foot jig stick, your CNC jig, and your whatever reel you like. And that doesn't make anybody a good jig fisherman. Most of the guys that I've seen that are good guys are really old guys with bunk tackle that still catch a lot of fish. So think about that. Think about, not to knock anybody that likes to do that. But think about it. Think about what your jig's doing and what it looks like to a fish, and then you're going to fish it better. And constantly adjust it until you see results. And if you get that one bite, know exactly what you're doing on that cast, so you repeat that bite. And another tip I'm going to give you for service iron fishermen, a lot of guys don't talk about, you don't need to start winding your jig in the second it hits the water. You can cast that jig out, you can let it sink 5 to 30 seconds, and do your normal service iron retrieve, but now you're doing a 45-degree angle and you're covering 30 or 40 feet of the water column instead of the top 5 feet. And a lot of times when the yellows are biting but not boiling around, like down at the rock pile at the Coronados, or on the back side of Clemente, or even on the front side of Clemente, Farnsworth Bank, any of that sinking that jig out a bit gets bites. All right, so let's talk about jigs here. For the since the sardine cycle started back in late 90s, no, longer, earlier than that, early 90s, 1993 or so, pretty long time ago. Bigger jigs have been the way to go. Teddy 45. Here's a Teddy 14A. You can have a Salas 7X, which I don't have in front of me here. Those are the standard go-to jigs for yellowtail, bass, barracuda when they're around. I don't think we're going to be in a sardine cycle entirely anymore, and that being the case, those bigger jigs aren't always going to be getting bites. When I was growing up, from when I was, 14 to probably 25 or something, early 20s, you had to learn how to fish a Tatty AA light or a Tatty A1 light if you wanted to get, barracuda and things like that, because they were feeding on anchovies. You throw a 45, you're not going to get nearly as many bites. You can catch the fish, but a small jig like this will outfish 2 or 3 to 1. And for comparison's sake, this is a Tatty 45 compared to it. It doesn't look that different, but this thing weighs probably a third of what this Tatty 45 does. So in those situations, you got to lighten up your tackle. Instead of using a heavy jig stick, I used to fish a CalStar 900M with a Trinidad 16 narrow full of 50-pound braid to a fluorocarbon, short fluorocarbon leader, throwing those lighter jigs. Nowadays, you can fish the same kind of rod, medium action, 9-foot graphite composite with, you know, a smaller reel. I don't know what the Shimano size are anymore. You know, even a Pen 25 narrow might be a little small or a little big for that. I know they have that smaller one. I've got one here somewhere. Yeah, this little dude here, this is a Fathom 8XND. I could see filling this thing up with 30-pound braid and throwing a double A light on it. Have a heck of a lot of fun. And that'd be, you know, we used to fish 25-pound mono in the old days, so the 30-pound braid to 30-pound leader and that small reel, cast that jig a mile and have a blast with it. Other jigs that might be a little bit more user-friendly would be a Tatty C. That's kind of half size between a Tatty 45. Also the Starman 150, which is smaller than the Candy Bar 112. See, it's not a big difference, but that little bit can make all the difference getting bites. And they fish like a Tatty 45 does. The smaller and lighter the jig, the slower you're going to have to wind it though, so you do the same presentation, but a little bit slower. And also, 100% of the time, you want to sink those jigs out a bit. 10, 20 feet. I do a 10 count. 1, 2, that's slow, before I start winding that jig in, because they will pop out of the water almost immediately. And yo-yo fishing, you know, I always love the Tatty 4.0. That's kind of my go-to size jig, but you're going to want to downsize to a Tatty 9 probably, or even a, I don't know if they still make them, Salis Christie 2, heavy. Got a hell of a lot of yellowtail on that at Coronados back in the early 90s, and when there was anchovies around. Also got yellowfin on it. And the thing about these smaller jigs like a Tatty 9 or a Christie 2, I can grab a Tatty 9, I think I have one here. Yeah, Tatty 9 or Christie 2, you can also, even though they're heavy, you can fish them with a surface iron if you need to. So you have trouble casting the light jigs, you go with one of those. And the most important thing with any jig is once it gets close to the boat, watch it, look at it in the water, see what it's doing, pay attention to what it's doing. Try and adjust your retrieve slightly and see if you can make it do something. And then your next cast, try and make it do that out there where the fish might be biting. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. You know, with pressured bass, or bass that aren't committing to a bigger bait, going smaller always works better. You got the weed through more small ones. But, you know, it's better than not catching anything, I guess. And hard bait, same deal. Match your hard bait size in a heavily pressured area, like let's say Palos Verdes or Catalina, to something that's appropriate to what the bass are feeding on. If you're at Clemente or somewhere else where they're biting good, I'd throw the bigger bait. When I catch a giant, go with the real big bait, but be ready to not catch much. Surface iron, downsize, match the bait. If there's chovies around, even if you have sardines in the bait tank and there's anchovies around, an anchovy-sized jig will get better than a sardine-sized jig. That's a mistake a lot of guys make. You know, these bait boats have to drive all over the ocean to find sardines sometimes. So the area where you're fishing, there may not be any sardines. There's just anchovies there, and the bass are not keen on it. They're not going to eat something. They want to bite a sardine, and they don't want to bite something the size of a sardine. Now, when the chovies around, you throw something smaller, you get a lot more bites. So that's about it. You know, mess around with your tackle. It's time of year to do it. You know, if you've never cast a light jig like this, tie one on your jig stick and go to the park, see what you can do, or go to your marina or whatever. And the lighter the lure, you need a tiny little hard bait or a little double A light, more of a pendulum cast. You want that jig swinging out, and then when it gets out to the end of your cast, then you're coming through with it. You're not trying to fire it out there like you are with a heavier lure. More of a gentle thing. And if you ever have to cast an anchovy in the future, you're going to be glad you learned how to do that. We'll probably talk about that another time though. But next week is the PCS show. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I have a seminar Thursday at 1:30. You know, Bill always gives me all the best schedules there. So guys, it opens at noon. So if you want to see me, you get there early. I'll be there all week. Next week, I'm going to do my video on Wednesday probably, or maybe Tuesday, depending on my schedule. And I'm going to go over some of the stuff that you might want to check out if you go to the show. So hope you guys have a great weekend, and check the weather before you head out, and good luck if you fish.